Okay, welcome to Chapter 5. Now we're starting to get into the nuts and the bolts of this entire enterprise. This is the good stuff, okay, collecting data. We're going to talk about a few different approaches to this. Some, like I have said, some you will use, some you may not, but the two that are going to be really important to pay attention to are observations and interviews. Now, this is going to be an overall for everything. That's what Chapter 5 is about. There's going to be a subsequent presentation that is on observations alone. And then in the following module, there will also be a presentation on interviews. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, talking about collection techniques, all right. Concentrating on observations, you can see there are different kinds of observations. Now, it depends on the researcher's own particular take on what an appropriate role for them would be in a setting where an observation is taking place. I know we've all seen where some will take place behind mirrored glass so that you're not even in the room. Others you may be sitting on the side of the room. Others you may be sitting a little closer. It will depend on what's relevant for you. Now, if you're going and doing an observation where your primary focus is the way that your classroom works, there's not really a problem with you moving around to different points, okay? That's something important to remember. Sometimes when people conduct observations, they think, well, I have to stand way back in the corner by the picture just so I won't get in the way. The people that you're researching know that you're there. Your presence already has an effect on what is going on. So your idea, or the thing that you're going for, your goal, is to collect the best data possible. Okay, so you have structured, semi-structured, unstructured observations. Structured will be more in a clinical setting, maybe behind a mirror, two-way mirror, something like that. Semi-structured, you may just be sitting away from a table where some kind of interaction is going on. Unstructured, more along the lines of moving around. You're not really confined to one place. Now, when people go and do observations, they do this in a number of different ways. Some people will go and use video. You have field notes using video or film. Sometimes people use their iPhones. Sometimes they will carry one of those little flip cameras. It just depends. An advantage to filming something is that you'll always be able to go back and see details that you may have missed the first time. That's the good part. The difficult part about that is whenever you go to film a particular setting through an observation, odds are likely that the audio probably will not be that good. So if you are farther away and you're talking about observing kids that are maybe in 5th or 6th grade, they may not talk that loudly. And so you may be left with really not that much speech that you can actually translate. So if you're wanting to film kids, you may just want to get up a little bit closer. Another thing that can happen, and I've done this myself, where when you conduct something like a focus group, which is also part of the interviews that we're going to be looking at later on, sometimes it helps to film because you can pick up on little nuanced gestures as people may respond to a question you ask, things like that. Okay? I would suggest taking either copious notes or filming observations because you're wanting as much data as you can get from these. Okay? Always include your own comments in the field notes. You should certainly be looking around at what is going on, but also take time to write it down. Okay? Okay, interviews, and there definitely is more to come on this later, but the idea here is that you are going and gathering information from people about their experiences or about their perception of experiences. We'll go on and talk about the way these should be structured. There will be an entire exercise devoted to developing your interview questions, so you'll have some good information to go off of. Journals. We're all familiar with journals. We've used them in undergraduate training. We have kept them as a way that our class works, and we needing to collect anecdotal evidence or anecdotal notes. But this can be a good source of information for an action research study. Whether you use your own journal or whether you use student journals or even class journals, it depends on what your study calls for. Okay? I've had people in the past that have gone and done their culminating research projects and used their own journals as one source of information. And so, from a certain perspective, it was kind of like an autobiographical approach. So, never underestimate these. If you're inclined to keep them and to keep them organized and make sure that the right kinds of information goes into them, they can give you a lot of good data. Okay? Existing documents and records. When you're talking about this, you're talking about things that the school has on tap. It may be test scores, it may be files for students, etc. Just bear in mind that the source for your information, if it is required that you have some kind of a clearance or an assent so that you can use it, you have to be sure to obtain that. Don't just assume that it's okay. All right? Classroom artifacts, hey, there you go. Okay, so the quality of qualitative data. This is something to keep in mind. You want the data that you collect to have a relevance to your study, okay? This is validity, the extent to which data collected accurately measure what they purport to measure. Now, the thing about this is that sometimes when people collect qualitative data, they want to infer what it means, read between the lines. I'm very hesitant to go and do that because people can say one thing and you think they mean another. And so a way to get deal with this is to have more than just one source of data to analyze. Going and looking at, you see down below, credibility and dependability. You have to make sure that the kind of data that you're collecting and analyzing is a true representation of the intention and the meaning behind what a person says, what a person writes, etc. And one of the ways that you can do this is by something called member checking and peer debriefing, which we'll get to here a little bit later. Okay, trustworthiness of data. There is an article that is over triangulation that you are going to be using as part of this course. It's a good idea to think in triangulated terms. That way, a person, as a researcher, another individual might not be able to say, well, you're just being myopic. You're just looking for what you want to look for. It's better to go and have more than one source of data. That could be an interview that you've conducted, a journal, maybe some kind of school assessment data, or whatever the bits of information are that you have. You want them to be able to be such that they overlap, so that one thing can be used to check another, can be used to check another. That way it's more reliable. Member checking, okay? Now, there is an excellent book by Mitch Denier called Sidewalk. And what it is, it's an ethnography over street booksellers in New York City. And what happened, he just basically hung out with them, and he used a tape recorder, little handheld tape recorder, to collect all his notes, and he wrote a substantial book from it where he explored the culture of book vendors that have their tables set up on sidewalks. What he did in the end was take this book and shared it with the participants of his study. He had 4 primary participants, if memory serves, and they all said, no, that's not what we meant. So he then went back and rewrote the book. Now, that may seem like a big deal, but there is an ethical dimension here. You want what you write, what you represent, to be accurate. Okay, so always be willing to go and do that. If you interview a parent, or if you interview an administrator, or if you conduct a focus group with some kids through interviews, you're going to want to do that. That's just a good idea. Prolonged engagement and persistent observation. There's just nothing like time that will go and help you understand the workings of a situation. That's just... you get the feel for how something works the more time you spend there. So if you think, well, I want to learn how this particular class works, so I'm going to spend 30 minutes here, odds are likely that 30 minutes is not going to be enough. So be willing to plan for more exposure so that you can sit back and take in, remember the word grokking, what is going on. Okay? Okay, different kinds of techniques for quantitative data. Now, you are welcome to go and use these in your study if you feel that they are relevant. Surveys, questionnaires, rating scales. There are lots of different ways people can do these. I've had some that have gone and typed them up on Microsoft Word and then just pass them out to their students, parents, whomever it was relevant to. They filled them out, they collected them, and then they tabulated that data, and that was part of their research project. Others have done it electronically. You can do this through software programs or internet sites like SurveyMonkey. You also have Google Docs that you can look at, and these kinds of approaches are not difficult. Just be willing to do a little bit of homework. The biggest trick to doing a survey is making sure, again, that it gets the kind of information that is useful to you. So don't think that if you're going to do a survey, you can just sit down and pound one out in 10 minutes. You'll need to go through several drafts. And if you're wanting to do a survey for your study, that's something that you should think about running past your classmates. Certainly, other people maybe in your school. Say, this is what I am wanting to ask. Does this survey get me there? Let me take a look at it as well. Okay? Likert and Likert's type scales. I've heard Likert, I've heard Likert. I say Likert, tomato, tomato. This can be good for going and addressing the perceptions that people have. I'm very much in favor of using these. I used the same kind of scale when I did my dissertation, and it will yield a lot of very good information. Okay. Following guidelines and suggestions for developing instruments. If it is not in this text, then you should feel free to be able to just Google it and look up, things like guidelines for developing a survey. Sometimes you can even go and you can look up survey instruments that are in existence and just out there on the web. They may be free, and you may not have to do everything from scratch. You might just have to tweak it a little bit. So take a look at the research assets that are already out there. And if you have any questions on how to do this, just let me know. Okay. All right. Again, with quantitative data collection, okay, you have different kinds of classroom assessments. We're all familiar with formative and summative. If these are relevant to your research project, if you're doing something that is focused more on instruction or pedagogy, keep these in mind as observations. Just make sure that there are parallel enough forms so that they yield the kind of information that is relevant to you. So you're not just shooting from the hip, so to speak. Okay. Validity and reliability. It's kind of the same with qualitative approaches. Make sure that when you are looking at collecting data that it gives you the kind of information that is relevant for your needs, for your specific research needs. Okay, reliability, determined by correlating results with themselves or with another quantitative measure, meaning how reliable do they perform? If you're using a particular kind of a test, standardized tests are this way. You want to be able to go and say that it consistently measures this particular skill each time. Okay, well, this is it for this particular presentation. The observation presentation, which is coming up next, be sure to watch that because you're going to be doing this as an exercise outside of class first. So I'm going to leave off here. This was Chapter 5 from the Mertler text. We'll talk to you soon.